And now we'll have Dr. Justin Fisher.
So we're talking about fear, and in particular thinking about whether or not we have an afterlife to look forward to. So what I want to talk about today is just a little bit of stuff that comes up in philosophy of religion about the possibility of an afterlife. And it turns out that a lot of this stuff is really creepy, this is stuff serious work that people are doing, but it really seems like Halloween stories, and so I'm going to have a little fun with those in this Halloween edition of my Waxing Philosophical. So when you think about the afterlife, it seems like there's a little bit of a contradiction to it. If you're dead, you aren't going to be alive anymore, and so how would it be possible to be alive after you've died? And one sort of answer to this question would be to think, well, maybe when we die, it's really only part of us that dies, that maybe it's just our body that dies, but if there's something else to us, a mind or a spirit or a soul or something like that, then maybe that could live on even after our body dies. And so I have here a picture of Descartes, because he was one of the philosophers who worked out this sort of idea in some detail. So he thought there was both his physical body and his brain, but in addition to that, he thought his thinking happened not in his brain, but instead in a separate thinking substance, which, for lack of a better picture to use, I'm using a ghost. The philosopher Gilbert Ryle called this idea the ghost in the machine, and here's a poster from a horrible B-grade movie. This is the first in a series of B-grade movie posters that I'm going to show you. But there's this idea of the ghost in the machine that does our thinking for us and somehow is in communication. So it gets messages from the brain. Descartes thought it was the pineal gland that's sort of located in the center of the brain that sends messages to your mind, and then your mind makes decisions and sends messages back down to your brain to control your body and do things. So if this is the sort of picture that you have of what we're like, that really we're these sort of ghostly thinking substances, so here's Descartes' picture of what we're like. So let's tell a story to see how this could allow for a possibility of an afterlife. So it was a dark and stormy night, and Descartes and his body go out for a walk, and all of a sudden, out of the mist arise some rabid philosophy fangirls. I don't know about you, but if I needed to meet my untimely demise, I think this would be a pretty good way to go. So the fangirls say, "Ooh, it's Descartes!" and they attack, and they tear apart Descartes' body. Seems like the end for Descartes, but I guess it isn't. If Descartes' really this ghost, then the loss of the body, it might be an inconvenience, but it's not the end of the world. The ghost can still live on, and in fact, the ghost can go on, rise into heaven, and have a new body created for it that it'll then get hooked up to interact with, and maybe this body's even better than the body that it had before. On this sort of picture, the afterlife's a real possibility. Of course, the problem with this picture is there's a much better movie. This is the only non-B-grade movie that I'm going to be showing clips from or anything from. Science has shown us that we can understand pretty well the way that our behavior is controlled just by events that are going on in our brain. We don't have any evidence of any sort of ghostly effects happening within our brain. And Occam's razor suggests that if we don't have any evidence of any sort of ghostly stuff going on in our cognition, then we probably shouldn't believe in this. And so that seems to rule out accepting the ghost hypothesis, at least until we have evidence for it. And so at least this story, the afterlife, seems to be ruled out by scientific evidence, and so then there's work in philosophy of religion trying to say, well, if we give up on the idea of our having some separate entity that could survive the death of our body, how could we have an afterlife? And so now I'm going to talk about several possible ways that this might go. So let's retell our story, this time without the ghost in it. So Descartes goes walking, the rabid philosophy fangirls arise, they tear him apart. That looks like the end for Descartes. But let's continue the story the way we did before and see how it works. So suppose that up in heaven, God or somebody creates a new body, a sort of clone of the old dearly departed Descartes, very similar to the original. Is this a way that you could live on in the afterlife even after your body has died? And so sort of, this is a Star Wars poster, actually, the Attack of the Clones, definitely a B-grade movie. This sort of view is advocated by the philosopher of religion, Dean Zimmerman at Rutgers University. He thinks that, well, you could just have a near duplicate of you created after the death of your original, and that would count as going on to the afterlife. I think there are some problems with this. One sort of problem is it seems like, well, that other guy probably wouldn't be Descartes. This would just be some new guy that looks quite a lot like Descartes. And one way of seeing this clearly is imagine we rewind the video a little bit. So just before the fangirls had demolished Descartes, if Descartes hadn't been demolished and you created this clone, the clone would definitely be a different person. That wouldn't be Descartes living on. That would be somebody else sort of like him that was created. And it seems like the fact that Descartes himself is going to meet this grisly end, that doesn't change the fact that that other person who's created isn't Descartes, it's somebody else. And so it seems like this sort of clone hypothesis is a way of, maybe I could be happy that somebody else will be created who's sort of like me, but it wouldn't be a way for me to live on after my death. It would be a way for some clone to live on after my death instead. So it seems like this doesn't really work at getting us an afterlife. So we need to start over. Here's a third way of telling the story. Descartes, again, on a dark and stormy night, gets assaulted by philosophy fangirls. They tear him apart, and let's suppose they go ahead and leave the parts of his body behind. And so the problem we had in the last account was, well, it seemed like this was just somebody new. It wasn't Descartes. And so on this hypothesis, we'll say, well, instead of just building a clone anew, let's take the parts, whatever remnants there are of Descartes, and put those back together again to make or remake a new Descartes. And so here we have them put back together and brought back to life. And then that newly revived corpse could then ascend into heaven. So that's a possible way of having an afterlife. It seems like maybe. And so this sort of, the dead will rise is a sort of slogan for this one. I'm not sure of any contemporary philosophers of religion who really advocate this, but this is a sort of view of the afterlife that a literal reading of a lot of the prophecies in the Bible about what the end days will be like seems to suggest is this sort of rising up of the corpses out of the ground. And there's several concerns about this sort of understanding of the afterlife. One is that it seems to be subject to the same sorts of worries as the cloning one does, is if you rebuild somebody, even if you're reusing all the ingredients from some dead person, and even if you put them back together in the same arrangement that the dead person was, it seems like maybe what you've created is a new person who's quite a lot like the old person, rather than letting that old person live on. There's also logistical worries about this. So if we imagine the philosophy fangirls, rather than just dropping all the pieces of Descartes, if they were cannibalistic philosophy fangirls, they might have eaten the pieces of Descartes, and then when they die, they're presumably, I guess, going to go to hell if this is the sort of thing they do. And so we have these pieces of the philosophy fangirls that need to be taken to hell, but they were also pieces of Descartes, so they need to be taken to heaven. You can't take the pieces in both directions. The logistics just aren't going to work out for this sort of view of the afterlife. And it's not just cannibalism. The cycle of life that corpses rot away, they are reincorporated into the ecosystem, and so the logistics just aren't going to work out for thousands of years of human history. The matter ends up getting reused, and so this sort of account of the afterlife probably isn't going to work. So on to our fourth and final B-grade movie version of the afterlife. Here we go again. It's a dark and stormy night. Descartes gets accosted by philosophy fangirls. They pounce, and let's pause it right here. Now the problem we had with the last account was it seemed like, well, if they eat the pieces of Descartes, then we're going to end up having and not work out. The logistics won't work out. So what we need to do is make sure that we sort of rescue Descartes from this. And so this is suggested by the philosopher Peter Van Inwagen. If we watch in slow motion, he thinks that, well, the way the afterlife could work is the body snatcher comes in and snatches Descartes away just before he meets his demise. He's taken off away to heaven. And so there, he made it to the afterlife. Everything works out. And so a poster version of this is Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And there's Peter Van Inwagen, leading philosopher of religion at Notre Dame University, who has advocated this view. Of course, there's a sort of obvious puzzle about this, is the philosophy fangirls are going to be a little bit disappointed because their philosopher has just escaped, but Van Inwagen has a sort of response to this. It needs something for the philosophy fangirls to eat, so as the body snatchers have a nicely prepared duplicate corpse to bring out, and quickly, we're still in slow motion here, the body snatcher brings the corpse out, and there the philosophy fangirls have something to eat. And it's all done so quickly that even our best scientific instrumentation can't detect the sort of snatching and substitution that happens in the process. And I don't know, as far as I can tell, this seems to give you the potential for an afterlife, or very near immortality, I guess. But of course, it's a pretty bizarre, outlandish sort of story. So. Here, just in quick summary, and then I'll give you 3 conclusions. So in summary, I've told you about 4 different ways that an afterlife might work. You might have a ghost that survives the death of your body. A clone of you might be created in heaven. It could be that the pieces of your corpse are somehow put back together and brought to life again to give you an afterlife. Or it could be that at the moment of your apparent death, you're actually snatched away and replaced by a corpse. So there's 4 different hypotheses about how the afterlife would work. Now, 3 conclusions about this. First, a couple of these hypotheses, it seems like they just won't work. These wouldn't really give you afterlife. It would give you the survival of something else a lot like you, but it wouldn't be you living in the afterlife with these hypotheses. But the other 2, it seems like at least they're technically possible. These are ways that maybe you could have an afterlife. So that's the first conclusion, is that there's at least some possibility for an afterlife. But the second conclusion is noticing that, wow, these are really weird, outlandish scenarios with lots of details and no evidence whatsoever of this stuff actually happening. And so Occam's razor suggests that we really shouldn't believe in either of these sort of stories of the afterlife. And then the third conclusion is, even if philosophy of religion isn't good for much else, at least it gives us some damn good Halloween stories.
Thank you, Justin. Let's see if we can get the kids out. I know that they've been working really hard.